Hi guys, I'm Andrea and welcome to a new video. So the month of May is Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month, so I've been trying to read a lot of Asian Pacific Islander owned voices books, but it came to my attention that it's also Latino Books Month, so I try to break up my reading by including a few Latinx own voices middle grade that I haven't actually read before. So recently I saw a study by the Cooperative Children's Book Center, and they're an organization that collect books every year in the US to determine and document how many minority books are actually written every year in the US. So the 2017 report just came out, and there was about 3,500 books received from US publishers this year, and only about 205 of these books were about Latinx people, and only about 108 of these were own voices, so about half. In 2016, the US Census reported that there were about 16.7 Hispanic/Latino households. So if you compare 16.7 million households against 108 or 205 books, it's like nothing, you know? So I decided to pick up a few books that I found in my library that were published in 2017. If any of you guys are interested in looking at the full report, I'll be leaving a link to them in the description box below. But at least for me, I remember growing up, I didn't read that many Latinx middle grade or kid lit books. The only one I could really remember is Esperanza Rising, and I still love that book so much to this day. The first book I want to talk about is Stef, Soto, Taco Queen. So this is a book about a girl called Stef whose family own a taco truck / car called Tia Perla. She's always embarrassed that her dad picks her up in Tia Perla from her middle school, and she always tries to make him park far away so nobody else will see what she's driving away in. She has two best friends, Arthur and Amanda, and one ex-best friend called Julia. Julia always makes fun of Stef for her family's business. She calls her smelly. She says she smells like dirty tacos and onions, and just makes fun of her all around. And this makes Stef really self-conscious. Amanda wins tickets to see Viviana Vega, a pop star, and Stef is not allowed to go. Instead, she's stuck selling tacos outside of the venue. And she is so mad at her parents, or her mom and her dad, but to her surprise, she sees herself in the newspaper the next day, and it turns out that she unknowingly sold a vegan gluten-free taco to Viviana Vega herself. And now suddenly everybody at her school love her and adore her and want to know all the details about what Viviana Vega is like in real life. And because they love her so much, they put Stef in charge of organizing a charity school dance alongside Julia, because they think that she can get Vega to attend, and Stef kind of just goes with it. She lives her lie, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger, but she doesn't really care. At the same time, her family's business is in trouble. There are new proposed ordinances for food trucks that would basically destroy the local food truck economy and destroy her parents' business. So she is stuck in between these two kind of worlds, and in the last act of the book, those two plots kind of really interweave with each other and work in a kind of symbiotic way. But this book made me so hungry because the food imagery is so like detailed and vivid. It's everything is described, so it made me very hungry, and I got this very serious craving for tacos and burritos at like 11 p.m. when I read this. So the second book I checked out is The First Rule of Punk. So I've heard so much about this book actually, and this is about 12-year-old Maria Luisa, who goes by the name Malu, from Florida. She is the daughter of a Chicana Latinx college professor, Mexican American, and this white dad who owns a record shop and loves punk music. And naturally, she idolizes her dad more than her mom. She calls her mom Super Mexican. She nicknames her that because she thinks that her mom wants to make her into this perfect señorita. So she kind of is always idolizing her dad and trying to follow a punk way of life instead. Her parents are divorced, but they get along super well, and she doesn't understand why her mother cares about Mexican culture so much if her mother herself wasn't born there. Her mother is from California, and her grandparents are the ones who actually crossed over to the States. So she doesn't understand why she has to learn or appreciate a culture that she isn't a part of, or what she considers not a part of. So she doesn't consider herself part of the Mexican culture. So Malu's world is turned upside down when her mother accepts a 2-year fellowship position in Chicago, and they have to drop everything in Florida and move to Chicago. And she's enrolled in this middle school named after Jose Guadalupe Posada, and he was a Mexican political artist and she moves, or they move into an apartment with a coffee house called Calacas that is across the street from them. The owner of Calacas is a Mexican-American woman called Mrs. Hidalgo, and she is very in tune with her culture and a very big fan of punk music as well. So this is the first time that Malu sees somebody that's a mixture of these two things, and she's completely in awe, and she begins to see Mrs. Hidalgo as this kind of mentor slash teacher person. Malu is surprised to realize that there are a lot of Mexican punk bands, and she begins to slowly appreciate her culture more. She starts to realize that being an individual doesn't necessarily mean she has to reject her roots. At school, she becomes fast friends with Mrs. Hidalgo's son, Jose, aka Joe, and a couple of other misfits. In her middle school, she's called a coconut by Selena, who is a girl she thinks is the perfect definition of the señorita her mother really wants as a child. Selena dances huapango, and that's a type of Mexican folk dance, and Malu and her mother attend a lesson with Selena's mother's studio. Her mother has a studio, and Malu sucks at it so much. She just fails miserably, and this just heightens tensions between Selena and Malu. They are totally nasty towards another, and by the time the annual talent show comes up, they are just at each other's throats. So Malu starts a punk band with Joe and a couple of the kids to audition for the annual school dance, but they are rejected from competition because it's not traditional enough. They decide to perform anyway on school grounds in what they call Alterne Fiesta, and they cover a punk version of the traditional Mexican song Cielito Lindo, and they chose the Lola Beltran version to emulate. And I will be including a tiny clip here. Ay, 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 canta y no llores, porque cantando se alegran, cielito lindo, los corazones. This book is so cool because Malu likes to make zines, so there are occasional like zines sprinkled throughout the text, and I think that was very cool to see, and I liked how visual it was, that element. I think a lot of young Latinx girls will find this book relatable. When we talk about own voices and representation, I think this book is such a perfect example of all that because it provides so much. There's a quote in the book that really stood out, and this is when Mrs. Hidalgo was teaching Malu about Mexican-American punks, and she says, "And there are Chicanos, Mexican-Americans," Mrs. Hidalgo said, "like us. Like us." I repeated the words in my head. The next song came on. It was another fast pop punk song with reggae beats. So even though she doesn't really dwell on that like us, it really did make an impact on Malu, and it's really cool to see a character that she could relate to and like identify with in a different manner. Malu also didn't speak perfect Spanish, and she was at the mercy of a lot of jokes in her middle school, so I like that this book tackled with this feeling of feeling too brown and not brown enough, which is like something I think that's almost universal to Latinx people and that everybody has experienced at one point or their life or another. Malu, she at the same time doesn't feel connected with her Mexican heritage and all at the same time too connected, and it's really interesting to see how this works, especially in a middle grade book like this. I loved that her mom was an educated Latinx woman. I don't think we see this enough in books in general. I mean, usually we get immigrant parents, and there's nothing wrong with having immigrant parents in a book. I just think that we don't get enough representation of educated Latinx people, and I think that should be something that we should see more in literature. As of 2016, only about 5 million Latinx people 25 or older had a bachelor's degree, and so characters like Malu's mother, I think, are so important to push that narrative for higher education. It's cool that this book deals with a character that's kind of removed from the immigrant process, but is still dealing with the aftershocks in her everyday life. When her mother tells her she should learn more about her culture and that she should be proud of it, she doesn't understand why she has to if she has never had a direct experience with it until she gets to Chicago. And the last book I read was The Epic Fail of Arturo Zamora by Pablo Cartaya. So Arturo is a 13-year-old Cuban-American boy from Miami, Florida, and him and his giant, loud, dramatic, amazing Cuban family own this restaurant together called La Cocina de la Isla. It was created by Arturo's grandparents, and his abuela is somewhat of a local celebrity in town because she always goes and greets and talks to every single customer. So his abuela's godchild from Spain, Carmen, comes to visit and he is immediately smitten. He is just infatuated with Carmen and everything she does, but she visits because his abuela starts to get very sick. At the same time, a real estate developer called Mr. People comes into town and he wants to build this giant luxury apartment complex on top of the land where La Cocina is located. Although La Cocina has been loved by city officials and locals for years and decades, no one seems to really care about its destruction if it means there's going to be a shiny new thing in its place. So Carmen and Arturo are very desperate to stop the gentrification of the neighborhood that they love, and it seems impossible, especially after tragedy strikes and, spoiler alert, Arturo's abuela dies. Arturo tries to understand his own grief through his abuela's favorite poet, Jose Marti, a Cuban revolutionary and writer, as the final vote to approve the luxury complex goes into place. So the proposed height of the apartment complex did not meet the city requirements, and because such was not able to be built, and People kind of just disappears and the Cocina stays. I like that this book dealt with gentrification because I think it's something that's affecting so many Latinx communities today in the US. And so many communities are being pushed out to the fringes by developers that see them as a nuisance rather than as a place for cultural understanding. This book dealt with food again, so again, a lot of food imagery, so I was pretty hungry by the end of it, I'm not gonna lie. Although, I was eating picadillo while reading this book at one point, and then they started talking about picadillo in the book, so I felt like I accomplished something. And it's cool because at the back of the book, there's a few recipes included for tortilla española and fricasse de pollo, and I've never had either of them, but I don't know, maybe I'll make a food video and try making this food. In all of these books, our characters were shut out by people that were higher than them. In Stef, Soto, and in Arturo, they were city officials, and in the first rule of punk, it was a school administration. And they were all doing things that were unfair and unequal to the characters, and the characters didn't let things happen to them. They tried to make a change even if it felt very helpless or hopeless. In all these plots, the kid characters took on a very mature role and became these very adamant activists, which I thought was interesting to see, especially since all these books were published in a post-2016 election world. All these books center around this idea of what happens after you achieve the American dream. In Stef, Soto, the dream was the taco truck, and Arturo it was a restaurant, and in Punk, it was, you know, her mother being a very successful first-gen Mexican-American. All of these were achieved through hard work and initiative, but the books I talked about deal with the fact that the stories don't end there. People's dreams don't always stay, and they don't come without problems. I picked all of these books pretty much at random, and they're really great books to read together. Actually, I was pretty surprised, and I really recommend them if you're looking for a short, easy to read, diverse read. And it took about a night to get through all of these, and I'm sure they have problems. They're all like debut novels, but they seemed so irrelevant, and they didn't really bother me because I think the messages that these books are trying to send to young readers is really outstanding. But yeah, that was my video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye.